mind me, don't mind me, but aren't you just excited about Tracy's projects? She is always doing something, whether it's a food drive, whether it's collecting money, and I am so excited to be a part of that. And, you know, I brought my bag. I am just only hoping I can fill this bag full of Tracy's worthy projects. Never mind it. I'm just going to gather a few things here. What about, I don't know. I don't know if I can part with this, though. I mean, I remember when my neighbor's grandmother's brother's cousin's neighbor's friend gave this to me. It's quite sentimental for me. Tracy, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to. But I'll see if I can find something else. How about this? I mean, surely there is somebody out there, C-O-N-N-Y, somewhere. There's only one little chip here, and I'm pretty sure that if you hooked your lip on there once, you wouldn't do it a second time. I'm pretty sure you would figure out how to use, yeah, Tracy. I got quite a few things. You know how it is with reality. There's a lot of things to run through. Oh yeah. You know, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to downsize to these anytime now. Yeah, like Tracy, gonna have to. But I'll see if I can. Oh, this. It survived another washing. It's durable. It's warm. It's so many things. I don't know if I really. It holds a lot of memories for me, as you can see. But I think I could probably part with this one. Oh, surely there's other things that. Malibu Barbie. I remember the days of Malibu. Oh man, I'm kind of sentimental about Malibu. But Kim, you lost your head a long time ago. Wait a minute. I'm thinking, surely I am not the only one that this has happened to. So surely somewhere out there, someone has the head. Think how happy somebody's going to be when Ken is reunited with his head. I think this could, yeah. My excitement grows when I think about all the things that can be going towards Tracy's worthy projects. Food, well, just a minute. But if I donate a can, I'll be below my 300 can reserve that I have at home. And the bean harvest isn't always that great. I don't think no, the beans are going to I'll have to hang on to those. Oh, Devil's food. Yeah, I must have forgotten Dan's birthday in 2005, it looks like. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that these are good within 20 years of their expiration. And if not, I think the weevil is actually a pretty good protein. Tracy? I am always so excited. I can hardly wait for the look on everyone's face when I actually present this. I'm pretty well known for my generosity and support. So, well, you guys, I hope all of you will be thinking about this. You know, when we really give things, I mean really give things. I didn't think I'd be able to fill this bag, but you know, you can. And I just want to encourage all of you to think about giving to these projects. And when we give to the Lord's Word, I hope you'll join me in the next event when we have another thing that Tracy's going to be sponsoring. Okay, guys, I'll see you at the next event.
Well, thank you, Connie, for what you're trying to accomplish. As you all know, Connie's usually a step ahead of me on everything that we do. But how they arrive at this, as I was contemplating what the topic I would endeavor to present here today, something that's been on my heart recently, and I'm sure it's been speaking to a lot of you, is we've made a decision to follow Christ. And in following Christ, we have a purpose. And that's something Connie and I talk about, is what is our purpose in life? The kids have left the house. Sometimes it gets a little quiet. What's life all about? Are we just putting in our time here? And as we come back and get recharged, when we meet with fellow believers, we realize that our purpose is in God. Our life can be fulfilled with Jesus. And to really turn us on to that, we want to commit to be dedicated disciples, studying the Word, praying, hanging out with each other, so that we become more adept at reflecting God's image to the world out there around us. Now, as thinking about that, I got sort of keyed up on, fruit. We talk about fruit here a lot. And one of the fruits of being a good disciple is the acts that we perform. And the title of this talk here today is Beautiful Acts for God. And as Connie was giving you her rendition of an act, I don't know if I could say how beautiful it was, but it definitely got our attention. And we do realize that we can read a lot from a person on how they act. And we definitely want them to see God in us, us reflecting His image. As I was listening to Connie, what were some of the characteristics that were working in her internal debate? She mentioned being generous. I guess she was giving, but maybe there's a little bit of iffiness on that generous aspect. She was willing to support a group cause and try to encourage others, but hopefully when they examined the items, they felt as encouraged as she was. But really, maybe why wasn't she totally beautiful in this act? Well, I think in that internal debate, and this internal debate rages in all of us, it's that battle between self and being a servant, isn't it? And boy, that self just hops up there every time it gets a chance. It's always on our mind. And with that in mind, the passage that I've selected to give us a little insight on beautiful acts is found in Mark. And so if you want to turn with me to Mark 14, and I'll start at verse 3 and read through verse 9. This is an account of Jesus when he arrived in Bethany to meet with his dear friends Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and spend a little time with them. So follow me as I read this passage. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, A woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Now, as we read through this passage about Mary and the situation, the act as it unfolded there in Bethany, there's 5 observations that we can make as we move through this passage. And I went with beautiful acts for God because if you look down here, Jesus termed this act as what Mary's done, and I quote, she has done a beautiful thing to me. But as we're looking at this passage, we can see that a beautiful act will not count the cost. A beautiful act will flow from the heart with humility. A beautiful act may be criticized. A beautiful act should eventually point people to Jesus Christ's death. And finally, a beautiful act will not be forgotten. We'll start off with a beautiful act for God will not count the cost. When we read through this, we see that Mary came in with an alabaster jar of nard perfume. And this was a valuable possession. If you read it, they tell you right in the passage that everybody in the room knew that if you sold this jar of perfume, it would bring more than a year's wages. So she didn't hold back anything. She was willing to worship the Lord with this expensive gift. She, as I think about it, why was this so valuable? Well, I did a little reading on nard. I sometimes get off in the weeds when I get into this and find interesting facts everywhere, but nard actually comes from India, and it's actually comes from a plant that grows in the Himalayan mountains. It grows up quite high. They say 9,000 to 16,000 feet, and so actually they speak in Nepal. There's also some areas in Afghanistan, but as I thought about it, people in Jesus' day climbing the mountain, picking these plants, processing this, and then getting it to the Holy Land. You didn't call up UPS or FedEx. It just, that was a long ways to go, and I'm imagining, camels, donkeys, boats, but probably all of the above. But that was quite an expense to get that there. But Mary, she didn't hold back. She willingly honored the Lord by anointing him with this perfume. And I thought, could I put up something so costly, a year's wages? Well, here I go. I was making fun of Connie, but what would my little voice say? Gosh, a year's wages. A new car could be sort of fun, or the house, it's always crying for improvements. I've never had a boat. Maybe that I would look pretty good in a boat. But it's easy to have that give and take in your soul. And we need to keep bringing ourselves back to what it's all about. And I think you look at Jesus. Jesus didn't hold back anything. He paid the supreme cost. He gave his life when he didn't need to save all of us who are in a huge need. A beautiful act. Oh, one of the other things I wanted to say about the beautiful acts and not counting the cost was bring it back to our personal body here. I've seen this demonstrated here, and it's always a very fulfilling thing to witness. I think back here a few years ago, by chance, we become aware of a family that was suffering greatly here in Paul. They had a bunch of the family had experienced a very tragic accident. Several of the family members were injured, several of them were killed, and they were in a real financial hardship to navigate this. And there were ones here in the body that took it upon themselves to meet these people, find out about their needs, to try to get this communicated out into the community. And there was this all culminated in a fundraiser here at the church. And there were many people from this body and outside the body that came and donated to help this family along the way. How many of you have received meals when you've been shut in? Visitations from members, cards of encouragement. These are all valuable acts that people are donating, putting their time in. They're not counting the cost. Giving us a reflection of who God really is, and it's really a rewarding thing for the giver and the recipient. As we move on to the next one, a beautiful act flows from the heart with humility. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That's in James 4:6. We read in Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. Paul paints a portrait of the humble man. A humble person is not selfish. A humble person does not try to impress others. A humble person spends their time looking at others as being better than themselves. And when a humble person is taking care of his interests, he's also caring about the interests of those around him. These are hallmarks of being humble. And when we get our heart right with humility, that's when these acts can speak volumes to people around us. I was thinking about Mary. She was doing this out of humility. You know, you could imagine if she could have taken this jar, made 3 laps around the room, held it high, displayed it, made sure everybody knew that, boy, this was really something. Hey, take a look at me. But no, she took it to the Lord and anointed his head with it. And if you read in John 12, this account is actually recorded in some of the other Gospels. If you read, you'll see the similarities to the accounts in Matthew 26 and John 12. They give you a second and third witness account of it. And in John 12, Mary actually also applies this perfume to Jesus' feet, takes loose her hair and wipes his feet with her hair. Definite acts of humility, because in that time, a woman was supposed to not show her hair in public. That was a taboo. And definitely when it came to handling feet, that was a job for the servants. But nothing was too humiliating or would draw Mary down that she couldn't perform this. She had one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to honor Jesus and really remember him for his upcoming sacrifice. Beautiful acts for God, they can be criticized. And it come out here in this verse, down here in verse 4 and 5. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. Well, if you read the other two accounts that I mentioned in Matthew, the people actually was referred to as the disciples. And if you read the account in John, John moves to the point to put the finger primarily on Judas. And I think as John wrote this, looking back, Judas, his motives weren't all that pure. He was talking about selling this and giving the money to the poor, but actually John makes a reference to Judas had access to the treasure and might have been thinking about how he could help himself to some of this. Mary, she kept on going, and she just tuned out the critics. It didn't deter her at all. And Jesus, he commended her for this act. In verse 6, he said, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing for me." And it's just, isn't that the ultimate goal? And wouldn't that be the ultimate pleasure to know that the Lord is pleased, he's honored, and he sees it as a worthy sacrifice. A beautiful act for God should eventually point people to Christ's death. This act occurred at the house of Simon the leper in Bethany, and actually it occurred on Friday, the Friday before Passion Week. And as I got to thinking, as I was following the teachings of our leader here, I was trying to look at the whole context of the event, back up and look at it. And here's Jesus. He's spending this evening. He's enjoying time with his friends, but I got to know he's also looking forward in his mind on what lays ahead of him. And he spends Friday with them, Saturday, the Sabbath with them, and then gets up on Sunday and heads to Jerusalem to make the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. On Monday, he's cleansing the temple, moving the merchants and the money changers out. On Tuesday, he's teaching parables. He's warning his followers of the Pharisees. On Wednesday, my Bible, they feel that it was a day of rest, but followed by Thursday with the Last Supper, an agonizing time of prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then to be hauled off by the soldiers headed to Pilate. And of course, Friday, it's burned into all of our minds what Jesus had to endure and then his crucifixion. So he was definitely, this comment he had here, she did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Yeah, that just sort of flew past me. I read it and kept going the first time I read through here. But then I started thinking about Jesus' reference. He's already seeing his death a week away. And it definitely makes this all sort of come together for me. As I moved into the last part of this, a beautiful act for God will not be forgotten. If you look down here, Jesus finishes out his comments in verse 9. "I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." And that was pretty cool. As I thought about that, first I thought, well, that's a neat tribute to Mary. And it is. It is a reward for Mary. But also, there's a greater good that comes out of that. I think about every time we read this account, remembering this act that Mary performed, the person that's reading it, the person that's sharing it with another, others that are hearing about it are actually thinking again about who God is and how wonderful God is. The praise just multiplies every time this act is recounted. I was thinking about acts that will not be forgotten. Beautiful acts will not be forgotten. And Connie and I was traveling last weekend, and we were driving home, and she and I had been talking about this, and she says, you know, what comes to my mind is the college packages. Do you think anybody ever remembers the college packages? And a little sidebar on the college packages, some years ago when we had a lot of kids connected to this body in college, the ladies would, and a man once in a while, I can say, well, I got involved a little bit. I got drafted. But they'd make treats, and they'd bring them in, and there would be a letter for each package. They'd all sign the letters and pack these packages and wrap them up and mail them to the college students. Well, Connie, she quit counting. She does things like that once in a while, but she quit counting at 1,000. So it had reached pretty wide and far. And but she's saying to me, do you think anybody really remembered that? Did they remember those packages? And I said, oh, without a doubt they remembered them, because I remember receiving some college packages when I went to college. I headed up to the University of Idaho, and those first couple of years could be pretty lonely. The stress of the discipline would increase, and lo and behold, you'd start feeling pretty sorry for yourself, thinking, what am I doing here? And then we would have this, the mail would come to our hall every day. There was one kid, he was designated the mailman, and he would walk up the hill to the post office and gather up anything that would be there and bring it back down, and we had little mailboxes at the end of the hall, and he'd put the letters in there and the little packages out in front. And you know, for some reason, there would be 30 or 40 people gathered every time he walked in the door. Everybody was looking for a little note from home. And I remember getting some of those little notes, and I remember getting some of those little care packages. And I told Connie, I said, that just meant so much to me to know that here I am, I'm not all by myself. Somebody 500 miles away is thinking about me. Somebody cares about me, and I could pick up and go on. And so the end of the conversation. And a couple days later, Connie comes home and she says, you'll never believe what happened today. And she says, take a guess. Of course, we always have to play this game. And I finally have to say, Uncle, you win. But she said, I got a call from one of those people that received those college packages. And they were asking about where do you find boxes to send college packages. This had made such an impression on her that she had begun to send college packages herself now. And she related how she just felt so encouraged when these would come. She felt that somebody would care about her. Somebody was thinking about her. And Connie said, I told her, I just heard those words from Dan a couple days ago. And she recounted how other kids in the hall would know that they caught on because these packages came more than once, and they would be really curious about, what did you get in your package? And she said they even were very curious about who the special man was in her life, because they kept saying on these packages, Paul. But then they realized it was Paul Baptist. But so we can feel without a doubt that our beautiful acts done with God in mind will not be forgotten. And I know He remembers them. He appreciates our act of worship for Him and the blessings that others receive from that. Another thing that I got off into out while I was working on this topic, it was on my heart. Several years ago, there was a dear lady in this fellowship that brought me a magazine article about 5 missionary men, and I'm sure a lot of you will recognize this, that had a heart to reach some Indian tribes in Ecuador. And this was in 1956. They had prepared for it for a couple of years. They went out and attempted to initiate contact with the tribe. They had a heart for this tribe because this tribe, there had been a couple of the gals over the years that had gotten away and had described what happens, how violent it was, how many of these members were dying from attacks from one another. And these gals were an inspiration to these men, and they decided they wanted to try to learn the language and go out and reach these people with the message of the Lord, try to turn their lives around and give them something to live for. And what happened is these men, they had a plane. There's one man was a pilot. He would ferry one man at a time out to a location that was a few miles away from this village they had identified, and they built a camp there, and then they would, on a daily basis, fly gifts over to this group of Indians and make gestures that they wanted to be friends. And what happened is these Indians, a few of them finally realized, and the men were trying to give them a heads up that they were camped a ways away and that they did want to meet them, and they sent a small group to meet them. And this group met them, came back, and through circumstances, the information was not received in the right manner, and then a group went back later and massacred these 5 men. And there's a lot of details that I'm skipping over. I know some of you know them. There's books been written about this. There's a movie that's been released. They're very moving accounts of what happened. But we hear a lot about them, but what was the next story is, I was speaking of Mary and her act with Jesus. I started to hone in on the wife of one of these men. Her name was Elizabeth Elliot, and the sister of another one of the men in the party. Her name was Rachel Saint. And they felt called to still reach out to these people and try to make a difference. And they worked for 2 more years studying the language, working with these gals that had come out, and they actually went in and made contact. It's an amazing story on how God worked in the eyes of these people. They understood the message, and several of them made commitments to Christ and came out. They've spread the word to others in the area, and some of them have actually come out of the jungle years later and made evangelistic appearances in other places of the world. It's very, there's actually a movie that's out, narrated by the son of the pilot, that goes into great detail. But I was thinking about putting these acts that these women performed back through our 5 observations, and I was thinking a beautiful act does not count the cost, and these women, the cost was huge. They lost loved ones. They dedicated lots of time in their life to go back and reach these Indians. It'll flow from a heart of humility. When they went in, from what I read, their goal, their motive was to actually tell these people that they forgive them for the heartache, the loss that these ladies experienced, and several other family members. You can imagine it touched quite a few. A beautiful act is subject to criticism. Now, I didn't read any accounts of criticism. I don't think anybody wants to write about that, but I can't help but think there was several people that, when they found out these ladies were headed back in, were saying, "Are you crazy? That's ridiculous. You've got other family that you need to be thinking of." Just a myriad of excuses, but that didn't deter them. And definitely the point, your beautiful act for God should point people to Christ's death. Well, that was a straight, easy one for them to prove, because they could point to the deaths of their loved ones. They could, and as over time they pointed to deaths of others, and then finally brought that full around to point to the death of Jesus and how his death frees everyone from that grip of sin in their life. It gives them a whole new purpose to live for. And your acts will not be forgotten by the Master or by others. I will definitely, there's been books written on this account, a movie or two, has been a documentary made. Definitely thousands, millions of people know these stories. Now, I think when you look at them, you think, well, they were special people. They're sort of superheroes. But I think we all have those opportunities to do beautiful acts. I'm sure most of them won't be so widely known. I'm sure they didn't see that when they went into this, but it's just, it's quite an awesome thought to think about. Anything you do will make a difference. It makes a difference for you, and definitely can make a difference for who witnesses your act, and most important, it does make a difference for God. So, in conclusion, I want to challenge all of us to consider being looking for those opportunities to do beautiful acts. I think those opportunities come by often. All you got to do is just get on Tracy's email chain. I mean, they're showing up multiple times, I think, even during the day, possibly, right? But just pick one or two and start to really give it prayer and look into, think about what can I really, I can accomplish this act, but maybe I can just, if I tweak it just a little bit, I can point something out, point out to someone how special Jesus is. I can just take it a little bit farther. So when you think about these priorities, just, I can't say enough, consider what a beautiful act, when you get ready to do your beautiful act, you will not count the cost. It will flow from a heart of humility. You will handle any criticism gracefully, and it will point others to Christ, if possible, and definitely it won't be forgotten.